My name is Darren Gall for flowtherapy.ca. Recently I was out with some friends of mine, and the topic of the Schumann Resonance came up, which was, well, surprising. But we all knew what we were talking about, and one of my friends posited, well, it's speeding up because it's indicative of human consciousness and our perceptions reaching higher levels of awareness or some such thing, which I know is a widely held belief, and it's a very comforting belief that there's an outward manifestation that human consciousness is somehow synchronizing up with a pulse of the earth that is also speeding up. And I started to trace this idea back, and I would have to say Greg Braden gets credit for it back in the 1980s when he theorized that the Earth's heartbeat, the Schumann resonance, was about double of what it was in the 1980s.
And the pulse of the planet is twice what it was in the mid-1980s.
I'm sharing this with you now because Earth is essentially going through a frequency sweep. Our fundamental pulse, our base pulse that has hovered around 7.8 cycles per second, now is changing. And again, there's a lot of controversy about what the change is, and we're witnessing the change. As we go through our planetary shift of this pulse, patterns of energy must change to respond.
There wasn't really any factual basis for his belief, but it became commonly held belief in the New Age circles that the Schumann resonance was speeding up, and that was a sign that human consciousness was also reaching higher frequency levels, a heightened level of capacity and awareness. And if you Google YouTube, you'll find it's a very popular topic, and many people will show graphs and charts and even data showing that indeed the Schumann resonance is speeding up, and that this is either proof of some sort of human consciousness Gaia interface, or that HAARP in the northern hemisphere is doing strange things to our atmosphere. So what do we make of it? Well, let's just focus on what we know. The Earth is a ball, and it has an atmosphere, and that about 100 kilometers up from the atmosphere is a layer known as the ionosphere, and these were discovered in the late 1890s and early 1900s. The fact that the ionosphere exists is an accepted fact. Radio waves will bounce off of the ionosphere, and Marconi and Tesla proved this. The curious thing is both Tesla and Hans Berger, who was the discoverer of EEGs, had felt that in some way this ionosphere and the trapped electromagnetic resonant frequency of it might be an explanation as to how human beings seem to be able to psychically connect to each other, because Tesla had a very strong psychic connection with his mother and Berger with his sister that they could not explain. And many human beings have had similar premonitions that someone is ill or dying in their family, and they reach out to them, and lo and behold, they find that it is true. Or an accident has happened in the case of Hans Berger. His sister, who had hardly ever spoken to him, all of a sudden contacted him, and he asked why. And she said, well, I had this sensation. He had actually fallen off a horse and hurt himself. So this propelled him to look for a mechanism for this psychic phenomenon, and he actually was certain that the brain produced electromagnetic energy, which at the time was probably about as crazy as an idea you could have. I mean, really, Hans? The brain produces electricity? This was a strange idea. But he persisted and was vindicated, and we use the EEG to this day. The interesting thing is this is the interesting thing. This is the thing where things get confusing. Our brainwaves and the Schumann resonance match, both in harmonic states and at their base frequency. There's a brainwave frequency known as low alpha at about 8 cycles per second, which also matches the Schumann resonance. And research by Rutger Weaver in the 1980s showed that human beings are actually sensitive to this very, very, very weak signal, which is very surprising, actually, that we could detect something that even our instruments couldn't detect until the late 1970s. So what is going on here? Well, we evolved on this planet is one explanation, and it makes sense that life would synchronize its cellular electromagnetic chemical reactions with the mother clock of the earth, the pulse of the earth. That actually makes a certain amount of sense. Chlorophyll matches the frequency of light. And our brains are actually quite sensitive. Birds can see electromagnetic field lines of the earth, which are very, very weak, it's believed. And humans have a pineal gland which can detect light, even though the pineal gland is inside the brain. We know this is true, and we also know that the pineal gland detects electromagnetic frequencies as well. Because light is a form of electromagnetic energy, so it's not so surprising that the pineal gland is confined only to light, but is actually capable of receiving other signals as well. So, we have a plausible connection that the mind can sense weak electromagnetic signals and our brain waves synchronize with it. And when we are in a creative, relaxed state, known as the flow state, we can measure brain waves and see that they do indeed match the Schumann resonance. But is the Schumann resonance speeding up? It can't be, because the Earth is the same size as it's always been. The Earth has not gotten any bigger since we've been measuring it for hundreds or thousands of years, going back to ancient Greece. The speed of light, we are absolutely certain, is a constant, and gravity. So what causes these electromagnetic waves is lightning. There's about 20 or sometimes as many as 100, perhaps, lightning strikes per second on this planet. We actually kind of live on a giant plasma ball where lightning strikes are occurring all the time. And this energy is transferred as an electromagnetic wave to the atmosphere. It travels through the atmosphere, but is trapped in the giant ball of the ionosphere and pings back and forth in the same way that sound waves will be trapped in a bell. And the tone or frequency of the bell is determined by the structure. So the Schumann resonance is determined by the size of the Earth and by the speed of light, which is the speed that electromagnetic energy travels through at its maximum. So how could it be speeding up? Because it can't be speeding up as long as the speed of light is the same and the size of the Earth is the same and the thickness of the atmosphere is the same. So Dr. Joe Dispenza and Braden are wrong on this. But the hard science on this is the Schumann resonance, which we can detect with instruments, can increase in its amplitude, like its strength can increase as lightning activity increases, which would be expected as the oceans warm and we get more intense storms. The Schumann resonance is the same as it's been since we've thought about it and since we've been able to measure it. And we're pretty darn certain it's been the same since life began. So you can relax and let your mind come into ease and harmonize with the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Gaia's heartbeat is the same as it was, the same as it ever was, and the same as it will be. Naho. I'm Darren Gall, flowtherapy.ca. Stay connected. In a future video, we'll be looking at how the